When it comes to holiday gift giving, I want to give things people really love. Beautiful, timeless pieces they'll wear for years. That's why I'm going with Quince. From Mongolian cashmere sweaters to Italian wool coats, Quince offers premium quality at a price that works for my holiday gift-giving budget. The only problem I'm having is deciding between Quince's beautiful home goods, jewelry, accessories, bags, and clothing. There are so many options, you'll definitely find something for everyone on your list. Oh, and I should mention their adorable kids and baby clothes and their holiday PJs, which will look great in your holiday photos. Every piece is made with premium materials from ethical, trusted factories and priced far below what other luxury brands charge. Find gifts so good you'll want to keep them with Quince. Go to quince.com/POTC for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada, too. That's QUINCE.com/POTC to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/POTC.
So creativity does not have to be in the arts, and it has two major components. It is something that is original and also high quality, effective in some way. It can be also very personal. It can be something that is a technique that you devise to better learn something. It is personally meaningful, it is original to you, something you've never done before, but it's truly helpful. It can be something that helps you deal with challenges of everyday life, that enriches relationships and everyday activities.
That was Zorana Ivcevic Pringle on Psychologists Off the Clock. We are 5 experts in psychology here to bring you cutting-edge and science-based ideas to help you flourish in your relationships, work, and health.
I'm Dr. Debbie Sorensen, a clinical psychologist practicing in Mile High, Denver, Colorado, author of Act for Burnout and Mac Daily Journal.
From America's Heartland, I'm Dr. Emily Edlin, a clinical psychologist based in Chicago, Illinois, and author of Autonomy Supportive Parenting.
Calling in from Vienna, Austria, I'm Michael Herold, ACT coach, confidence trainer, and the author of an upcoming book on developing your confidence and social skills.
From Boston, I'm Dr. Yael Schoenbrunn, faculty at Brown University and author of Work, Parent, Thrive and an upcoming book about misunderstanding.
And from coastal New England, I'm Dr. Jill Stoddard, author of Be Mighty, The Big Book of ACT Metaphors, and Imposter No More.
We hope you take what you learn here to build a rich and meaningful life.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock.
Hey listeners, just a super quick reminder that you can listen to the podcast ad-free by supporting us on Patreon for just $5 a month. Or you can support the podcast with a one-time donation on Buy Me a Coffee. Thank you to everyone who's already supporting us. Be sure to stay tuned to the end of the episode for our co-host discussion of today's interview.
Hi, everybody. It's Jill here, and I'm so thrilled to have my guest, Zorana Ivcevic Pringle. Zorana is a senior research scientist at the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. She studies the role of emotion in creativity and well-being, examines the role of the arts and art-related institutions in building creativity, and wants to know how we move from having an idea to doing something with it. She edited the Cambridge Handbook of Creativity and Emotions, publishes research in creativity studies, and speaks to diverse audiences about creativity and how to make it happen. Zorana received the Award for Excellence in Research from the Mensa Education and Research Foundation and the Berlin Award for Outstanding Early Career Achievement in Psychology of Aesthetics, Creativity, and the Arts from the American Psychological Association. She's here today to talk to us about her book, The Creativity Choice, The Science of Making Decisions to Turn Ideas into Action. Zorana, welcome to Psychologists Off the Clock. I'm so happy to have you here today.
Thank you for having me. Very excited to talk to you.
So I'm really curious, first and foremost, what got you interested in this topic? Can you tell us a little bit about your own relationship to or experience of creativity in your own life and what made you want to turn it into your whole field of study?
Well, I have so many different layers to answer this question. At the personal level, I have a formative experience when I was, I think in first grade. It must have been first or second grade because I know where I was. And it was a big national holiday, and our art teacher said that we can do whatever we wanted in class and just to celebrate the holiday. And I did not know what to do. I love drawing. It was my favorite thing to do at home. But once it came to doing it in classroom, I had this block. I was considering what I should be doing. And then I started looking what everybody else did. And I essentially did what everybody else did. At the end of the class, I realized that there were 24 children in class. 23 of us did exact same thing. There was town square with Venetian fort, with flags flying. Everybody did that same thing, except for one student, actually my best friend, who did something very different. And she made a drawing of students at an assembly at doing a talent show. And I did not really know at the time the word creativity, I don't think, but I knew I wanted whatever she had.
Oh, that's so interesting. I love that story. Are you still friends with her?
Well, life took us in very different directions, but we have reconnected in the times of social media. And I have actually shared that story with her. And she did not even remember this because it wasn't important in her life. It was important in my life.
That's exactly what I was going to ask you. If you had shared that with her and if she remembered, it's funny the things that stick for us that don't stick for others. Well, let's jump into some of the things that you talk about in the book, especially that I think many of us, when we think of creativity, we think of drawing or music or, painting or writing. And of course, being creative does not mean necessarily that you paint or draw or sing or write. So what does creativity mean?
I love that we are starting with this because even I started with a story, a personal story, and had to do with drawing. And sometimes I hear people say, "Oh, it's interesting that you study creativity. I am not creative. I cannot draw." So there's this very close connection in people's minds. And it's an unfortunate one because if you think creativity means drawing or art and you don't happen to be artistic yourself, you are not going to be interested in creativity because you think that it's outside of your purview. So creativity does not have to be in the arts. It can be in any endeavor that humans engage in. And it has two major components. It is something that is original and also high quality, effective in some way. And of course, there are nuances there. So originality does not have to be something that has never been seen ever in human history, and it's going to be radically changing how we live. It can be also very personal. It can be something that is a technique that you devise to better learn something. It is personally meaningful. It is original to you, something you've never done before, but it's truly helpful. It can be something that helps you deal with challenges of everyday life, that enriches relationships and everyday activities, what we call everyday creativity. And it can be in our professional lives, something that requires certain level of expertise.
Yeah. The example that comes to mind for me is I have a really good friend who's an occupational therapist.
Mm-hmm.
And she read one of my books. I wrote a book called Be Mighty. And in that book, she learned about the concept of willingness. And she's an occupational therapist for kids. And so she created, I guess you could call this artistic, but I wasn't thinking of it in that way. But she created this little cardboard willingness meter. And it's like a slide rule with a green, yellow, and red that the kids can report how willing they're feeling to do some new thing that she's introduced to them. And so even though willingness is not a novel, original, new concept in general, she took it and created a new strategy or system for teaching kids about willingness and solving this problem of when kids are being resistant in therapy.
It's a beautiful example. I think that's a beautiful example of everyday creativity, of solving a problem in her practice. And it's in an original way. This did not exist before. And it was a new way for her kids to be able to communicate something that they might not be able to communicate in terms of the concept of willingness, which is rather abstract.
Yeah. And so are there any other examples that you can think of from your whole, lots of time studying creativity that come to mind that other people might not immediately think of as an example of creativity?
So I remember way back when I was a student and having to learn vocabulary words. So I did not really find it very engaging to study with flashcards, and it was boring, but I loved music. And so I would do, and I love recording. It was the time of tape recorders way back. Okay, I'm dating myself, but I would record myself on a tape recorder, saying the words, and then I would play them, pause them, and that was more engaging because it reminded me of music. And it reminded me of what I did with this tool that I really enjoyed working with.
Right.
And then I'm thinking in, professional settings. This does not have to be something that is inventing the new iPhone. It can be, one of my favorite examples was from a very, very non-obvious place. I was working with a hospital, and I heard this example from a supervisor in a food services department. And what he noticed was that his workers, his team members, were getting really frustrated, tired, really burned out, at a great risk of burnout. And so he noticed this. So it started with him noticing something that is very emotional in nature, this frustration. And what could he do? He wanted to help. He was motivated to help. And you could approach it in different ways. You could say, well, this is a risk factor for burnout. So maybe I could send workers to a wellness program at the hospital, which, it had this program. But he said that would not really solve the crucial, that underlying problem. And then he ended up doing an in-depth observation and completely redesigned the workflow. So that they did not have to stretch in inconvenient ways, that the food orders were placed to be convenient and streamlined. And there were multiple effects of it. That was a creative solution to a problem. But the effects were that the workers were well off. Now they did not have those feelings of frustration and exhaustion. They were less likely to look for other jobs and leave. And there was another outcome, and that is greater patient safety. Food is part of the patient treatment plans, and there were lots of benefits on so many different levels. So it does not have to be something that is in the arts, and that does not have to be something that is research, development, or design where our minds first go.
Right. Right. And I've been guilty of that. Oh, I'm not creative, kind of back in the past, because I always thought of it as sort of tied to the arts. And so when I was reading your book, my husband was sitting there, and he's an IT guy, like tech, logical. And I thought, I wonder what he'll say if I ask him. So I asked him, do you consider yourself creative? And without even a pause, he immediately said, yes, I'm an engineer. I fix things. And I agree with this. I think he's creative. And I always think of this one example. We used to have a sliding screen door that went into our backyard. And when our kids were little, they couldn't reach the handle. So he took one of those, do you know those hooks that they sometimes call a drunk octopus? Because when you know what I'm talking about? And it's just like a little double hook, and it looks like a octopus ready to fight with its dukes up. So he took one of those hooks, turned it sideways, and drilled it into the sliding glass door down at my kids' level. So then they had a handle that they could open the door. And I mean, my brain would just never work like that, but it's an original use of something that solved a problem. And, there's lots of examples of that where he comes up with those like very creative, but it's a more engineer brain kind of creativity.
Yeah, it is, because creativity is possible in any kind of human endeavor.
Right.
And you have shared it now, just between the two of us, we have shared it in the process of learning, in the process of solving problems in your everyday environment. We have shared it in the therapy process. We can go with examples of education, and we go on and on like that. essentially any kind of everyday or professional setting you can think of, creativity is possible.
Right, which means we all can be or are creative if we come up
We
with
have the potential.
a
We have the
novel solution
potential.
to a problem. Yeah.
Exactly. We have the potential for being creative. I usually say when people say, oh, everybody is creative, I'm saying, well, no, everybody has the potential of being creative.
Right.
Now, the difference is whether you are going to do something about that potential, but you are going to develop it so that it grows as a potential and as a capacity. And then whether you are going to make those choices, that's why the title of the book is Creativity Choice, whether you're going to make choices to use the potential in your situations that call for something new and something different to be done.
Well, let's talk about that, because I think we've all had someone in our life come up with some big $1 million idea, or maybe every one of us has had a big $1 million idea, but very few of us ever actually do anything to execute that, right? So what do you think gets in the way of people being creative?
Oh, there are several things that get in the way of people being creative. I think there are two big groups. One has to do with uncertainty, and uncertainty is psychologically experienced as risk. And another kind that we have already touched upon is the sense of, well, maybe this is not something for me, that lack of confidence. And we know that confidence is fuel for action. We do those things we are confident about.
For sure. Yeah, you have a whole chapter on the importance of willingness to take risks. That if you're going to do something new that hasn't been done before, you have to tolerate uncertainty, risk failure, risk making mistakes, risk judgment or critique, right? Risk having no idea what the outcome will be. You may or may not get the outcome that you want. And then you say to overcome these obstacles, we have to accept ambiguity as an inevitable part of the creative process. And I love this. You don't have to believe in yourself to start, but you do need a growth mindset and creative self-efficacy. And this is what I see in my therapy practice, a huge obstacle to people moving forward with their goals or even their values is this, like, I need to feel confident first and then I'll go do the thing. And I think that's such a trap, because when we're doing things that we care about doing well and it's new and challenging, then how on earth would we be confident? Because of course there's going to be ambiguity, uncertainty, et cetera, by nature. So can you talk a little bit more about these concepts and, like, can these beliefs be cultivated, this growth mindset, the creative self-efficacy?
I really love what you have mentioned there. Very important points of, yes, there are risks that are inherent in the creative process because, well, by definition, it is something that is original. So even if it's just original to you, you haven't done it before. And if you haven't done it before, there are two main kinds of uncertainties. One is, can you rise to the occasion? Can you figure out the things that have to be figured out to do it? And that is that intellectual risk. And then there is a social reputational risk. What are people going to say once I have the ideas, once I start doing something? And those are very real. I do not want to minimize those concerns. And I sometimes hear people talk about these concerns in terms of you have to become comfortable with discomfort. And that sounds reasonable. When we hear it, it sounds reasonable. But once you start thinking about it, and once you start saying, okay, I'm going to become more comfortable with discomfort, most of us realize that we cannot do that. Like, we don't even know what it necessarily means. It just sounds one of those things that should be possible, but in reality, it might not be. I think what is truly empowering is that you actually do not have to be comfortable. It's okay if you're not comfortable. You can act without being comfortable. I recently came across a quote, a beautiful quote by Georgia O'Keeffe, and she said that she was terrified. She used the word terrified of everything she ever did in her life, but it did not prevent her from doing it. Yeah. And I very much identify with that personally. that there are these concerns, there are these real voices in our heads that make us doubt, but we can still get started. The good thing, if we get started without waiting to have all of the confidence in the world, is that confidence is really built from experience.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine starting, you tackle the first task of, 100 on a big project. But once you tackle it and once you make progress on it, you can look back and say, hey, I was able to do this. Then I can probably do task number 2. Once you do task number 2, you can look back and say, oh, I didn't do just one thing. I have done 2. And confidence grows in that process.
Right. It's like you have to do it first and then the confidence comes versus waiting to feel confident before you act. I call this concept the gap trap. Mm-hmm. And so it's the idea that we get trapped in stagnation due to a perceived gap. And it could be skill, expertise, but it could also be confidence, readiness. And we believe we have to fill the gap before we move forward, which of course is a trap. And then part of the way I kind of help people to be willing to move forward, even in the presence of that discomfort, like you were talking about, is to practice being uncomfortable. So I actually sometimes call it getting comfortable being uncomfortable, but it's not. What it is willingness to do things in the presence of discomfort. And you can practice that a lot of different ways, like just putting your shower a little too hot or too cold. Or I have my clients eat Bean Boozled jelly beans with me. And these are the jelly beans that might taste like a strawberry smoothie and might taste like vomit. And it's this wonderful practice of just being receptive to things that might be unpleasant and not doing anything to move away from it, and sort of shifting your relationship to this place of like, okay, this is uncomfortable, but discomfort's just a feeling. It's not dangerous. It's temporary, and I can handle it. We don't give ourselves enough credit for the level of challenge we can get through. And I think the more people practice sitting with discomfort, the more likely they'll be to really engage with creative endeavors when there is going to be that ambiguity, uncertainty, risk that you're talking about.
And you're mentioning something really important. When we are willing, I think that word willing is crucial. Willing, or able to tolerate, or accepting. When we are willing to accept some discomfort, lots of things open up. Often we can find inspiration in things that are uncomfortable or things that are unpleasant in different ways. If you think of entrepreneurs, they find inspiration with things that are wrong in some way. I love the story of the founder of Instacart. He hated everything about the grocery shopping experience. And he can go really on and on how much frustration he felt in this process. But instead of distracting himself from it, instead of just making himself feel better by getting a little candy bar at the end of the process, or, some kind of reward to make yourself feel better, he said, hey, what is this feeling telling me? And learning from this, which becomes inspiration. And I'm particularly curious how we can come to understand the emotional side of the creative process and then harness it.
Right. Yeah. That story reminds me of that quote, be the change you want to see in the world. Right. So instead of just seeing things that you don't like and complaining about it, maybe this is an opportunity to be creative, to come up with a novel solution to a problem. Let's talk about problems, because when it comes to, I think, some of the assumptions we make about creativity, it probably seems like inspiration just happens to strike naturally creative people, when in reality, you talk about how creativity really has more to do with finding problems and seeing them as opportunities. So this is essentially what you're talking about with Instacart. So can you talk a little bit more about that relationship between creativity and finding problems?
It is finding problems and then exploring problems. we have this automatic association between creativity and coming up with ideas or solving problems, and that's part of it. But how we get to problem solutions is by focusing on asking questions about the problem. And it seems very counterintuitive and rather strange to even say or abstract. So let me give you an example. Psychologists at the University of Chicago did an experiment. And they asked art students at a very prestigious Institute of Art to create a still life painting. And you think that, well, there was already a problem. Make a still life, right? The problem is already there. But that problem is very general. When you're doing a still life, you have to know what's going to be in it. And there are lots of different options that could be. And everybody had the same options in terms of what objects they could include. So psychologists gave them this pile of 30 some different objects. And they found something really interesting, that those who ended up creating the most creative paintings, judged by art professors and art critics, they did not just arrange objects and then said, okay, I'm now going to focus, stay on task, and spend all of their time on details of the painting. Instead, they would arrange a set of objects, very quickly sketch something, then approach them again, feel different objects, feel their textures, feel their weights, compare them. If they had some mechanical parts, play with the mechanical parts. And you would think, why does it matter that they are playing with the mechanical parts? It's going to be a two-dimensional painting. That's not going to be visible. But the act of doing can inspire something that you cannot predict at the beginning. And it ties to these themes we have discussed of being open to not knowing upfront everything that is going to happen during the process, and allowing for something to emerge in the process. Not being, I am going to now schedule every 5-minute increment, know exactly what I'm doing, and just stick with it in a very gritty manner. It is rather a process that is exploratory.
Right. You alluded to emotions, and you have a whole chapter on how emotions can spark creativity. Can you give some examples of that?
Emotions, according to emotion scientists, are information. They are information that tell us something that is going on about ourselves in our state of mind, and they tell us something about the state of the world around us. Our interaction with the world, how we are doing with our goals or with relationships with others, and they give us data. And we have already talked about creativity being a process of making choices of going with something that is original and could be effective. And if we then put together these two, say, okay, emotions are information and the creative process is a process of making choices or decisions, we know, and very intuitively so, that more information is good for decision making. So emotions are a kind of information that can tell us something. They can tell us, well, there is an opportunity out there, and that opportunity could be coming from something pleasant. I have done interviews with artists who vividly describe a moment, a winter day, in which sun was hitting the snow in a way that it felt like sparkling, and they wanted to capture that. And it can also be information that is not pleasant. It can be a point of frustration. There is a story of how an engineer was visiting one of the hospitals where they had their MRI machines, and ended up meeting a young child who was terrified of going to an MRI machine. And he did not try to say something that would make the child feel better just in that moment. I mean, he did that too, but also said, what is going on here? Noticed that emotion, noticed that fear in somebody, and said, this is something that should be solved. And you know what happened as a result? An adventure series of MRI machines. So a child enters a machine and they have a story that they are hiding in the hold of a pirate ship and have to be really still and quiet in order not to get caught. So children did not have to get sedated anymore. And sedation is a problem. It's a problem because of side effects. And it's a problem because you cannot run all tests with sedation. So emotions can really help us point in a particular direction.
Yeah, that they're indicating that there's a problem that needs to be solved. Or I'm thinking even, I had a series of personal experiences that all sort of added up to a lot of sadness and anger and ultimately grief is what I would call it, but like very intense emotions, and just like didn't know what to do with it. And they weren't problems that could be solved per se. But what I've done is I'm in the process of creating a new podcast that is basically a platform for truth tellers to speak up, to talk about things that people often stick their heads in the sand about. You know, some of what I was feeling grief around was this tendency of humans to shy away from difficult topics. And they're topics that really, in my opinion, need to be discussed. And for a long time, I was just kind of sitting in that and trying to figure out what the heck to do with these really hard, uncomfortable feelings. And now I've like created this new form of art that is going to be a way to give people a platform to have those difficult conversations. And that all came from some very intense emotions.
And it is a beautiful example how sometimes sitting with emotions, even if they're not pleasant, and sadness and grief and intense experiences are not pleasant when they are happening, but we have an opportunity to learn and to harness them for something that can be transformed.
Right, exactly. Yeah, like turning pain into purpose, if we make it a cliche. So there's also a flip side, though, where emotions can interfere with creativity. Can you talk a little bit about that and what we can do to address that or to prevent emotions from interfering with creativity?
Of course, sometimes emotions interfere with creativity. Sometimes emotions interfere with anything we are doing. And those are the times when we really have to manage them and regulate them. Experientially, we have this sense that there is a situation or a trigger and emotion just happens. But we actually are able to have agency in relation to our emotions. There are things we can do to influence their course, to make them less intense, to switch from one emotion to other, and for them not to be something that manipulates us, but that we have some influence in. So underneath that, if we could put a very, very slow motion, that process of how emotions happen, we would see that, yes, the situation or a trigger matters, but other things matter too. It matters exactly what we are focusing on in a situation. It matters how we interpret it. Do we interpret it as a challenge or as a threat? And how we react to it. How we react to it with our actions. And that is often the first thing that comes to mind. Are you going to do something that you might regret at a different time? Or have even a physiological reaction that may become overwhelming, that becomes difficult to breathe, or you get to be very shaky. And that can, in certain circumstances, be really relevant. And it turns out that along each of those points that influence the emotional reaction, we can do something about it. We can use different kinds of strategies to nudge emotion in one way or another.
Yeah, and I think it's really important for people to pay attention. Like one thing that just popped in my head is Sometimes if we're feeling some intense emotion, the automatic tendency might be to vent. I'm just going to complain to you about this situation that's so terrible. And in the moment, that feels like it's helpful because I'm discharging. But really, and I believe this is what research shows too, like really it just kind of perpetuates those feelings. It doesn't really solve the problem. So I think there are probably times where emotion is kind of obviously getting in the way of creativity. And then other times where it's like a little bit more covert, if that makes sense. And so it's almost like the first step is needing to recognize, what are you feeling? How is it impacting you? And like even just acknowledging that, oh, this is a moment where I need to engage in some emotion regulation, like some good, solid, healthy emotion regulation strategies, not things that feel like they're working, like venting or drinking wine or whatever other things we do that work in the moment, but that really aren't going to open us up to being creative if we don't manage it in a better way.
That is a very good example. And the first step in regulating emotions is acknowledging what is happening. It really helps if we are also able to label very specifically what is happening, so that we are not using very broad terms that may be overly general. I am not feeling well. Usually people use the word stressed to be very general and really refer to all kinds of things. Are you feeling stressed because you are disappointed? Are you feeling stressed because you are under pressure? These are all different kinds of experiences, and being able to pinpoint is going to in itself suggest some strategies. So are you stressed because, well, maybe you are anxious. Maybe you're anxious because you have a big presentation coming up. There was a wonderful study about how people tell themselves before a presentation, an important presentation. And it's one of the most anxiety-provoking experiences is giving a presentation. Public speaking, it's not something that happens to others. This is a very common experience.
Right.
So if it's happening to you, you are in company of most of humanity. And good news is you can do something about it. If you tell yourself, I am anxious because I truly care how I am going to do in this presentation, your experience is going to be different than if you say, I'm anxious because I'm not really sure that I'm prepared well enough, whether I can actually do this. These are going to have very different emotional tones behind them, and then consequences to how you actually do.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Well, we can't talk about creativity without talking about creative blocks. You know, we all hear about writer's block, but blocks can happen in any creative endeavor. And I think first and foremost, we probably need to recognize that this is a when, not an if, right? If you're doing anything creative, there's bound to be a block, and that they're a normal, natural part of the creative process. So tell us, how do people normally treat creative blocks in ways that are problematic, and what should we do instead?
When we experience a creative block, and we chances are going to experience it, we tend to get very self-critical. We tend to start saying you could have, you should have, and by personal preference or by personality and our nature, we tend to then insert what you could have or should have. What you instead could do is, well, a series of things. When you are experiencing creative block, the most common emotional side of it is an overwhelming sense of frustration. That frustration for some is tinged with self-doubt, for others with self-recrimination, for others with anger, but frustration is dominant. And it has consequences. The consequences, we get into this hamster wheel of getting more stuck on what we are already stuck on. It is like driving in snow. It is like driving in a sandbank. Your wheel keeps spinning and you are not moving.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to remind ourselves what creative block is. Creative block, by its definition, is lack of progress that is not due to our lack of ability. We need a moment to let that sink in because that's not necessarily how we feel about it. How we feel about it is, I cannot do this. And you have good reason to believe you cannot do it because you've been at it and nothing is happening. So number one thing is to remind yourself it's temporary and use a little emotion regulation trick. Imagine that instead of saying all those things to yourself, you are trying to help a friend. A friend approached you and is telling you, describing exact situation in which you are in. You are working on something, you are working really hard, but you are not making progress. We tend to say to ourselves, you could have, you should have. But are we going to say that to a friend? Chances are we are not. Chances are we are going to show kindness. And chances are we are going to show compassion. If we are able to take that, what you're going to say to a friend, for yourself and try to imagine what you would say to yourself if it was that situation, then you might get a little bit of self-compassion. Mm-hmm. You might get yourself to that point of saying, well, it feels like you should have known better, but actually you have done everything you knew how to do in that situation and in those circumstances. Okay, what can I do now that is different?
Yeah.
And as you take that edge off, emotional edge off, and perhaps take a little break so that you create some physical distance, you might be able to restart your thinking and re-engage and think in broader ways again.
Yeah, I love that. And I imagine too that one of the things that might, tell me if you agree with this, but that might contribute to blocks is being overly focused on the outcome, which might seem so big and far away from where you are right now. And if you can focus just on the process and the willingness to do the process imperfectly. So I'm thinking about writing. That's really my creative endeavor that I engage in the most. And when I get writer's block, it's like I can't think about the finished book or whatever it is I'm working on. And I have to be willing to just sit down and type, even if it's going to be complete crap, and willing to think like, okay, even if I write for an hour and I throw away every single word that I've typed, just that process of engaging with my brain or the material or whatever it is can loosen up that block. So then you're back. And the other thing that occurs to me is I wonder if part of what contributes to block is when people have an expectation that they should like always be in flow. Because we've all been in flow and it's gorgeous. It's the best feeling ever. And it's kind of rare. Like a lot of creative endeavors, I think, are 90% not in flow. And so it's that like willingness to kind of grind through even when you're not in flow, but not being in flow doesn't necessarily mean it's a block.
And when we are talking about creativity, when we are talking about high performance and excellence, we do discuss flow a lot. And flow is an experience that is a match between high demands of a situation and very high skills that can match those demands. But it does not happen at all times. It does not happen when we have other things going on that can become intrusive thoughts or just physical intrusions. We need to have not just mental conditions, we need to have sometimes physical conditions in order to reach flow. And that's why flow is not something that happens on a daily basis. But I agree with you that we might have an expectation if you are a creative person, if you are a productive person, you are going to experience a lot of flow. But that lot is very relative. And it depends on lots of other things. And we have to just allow ourselves not to be maximally productive at all times.
Right. Yeah.
If you are a writer and in one day you write 200 words, and on your typical day you write 1,000 words, and on your maximally productive day you write 2,000 words, you know what? Those 200 words are still more than nothing.
And it all ends up with some product at the end. Yeah. Well, one of the things that I cherish about doing this podcast, which I consider a creative endeavor, is working with my amazing co-hosts. We have this team of co-hosts and we meet, every other week. And 4 of us are all book authors and we edit each other's writing. We meet monthly to kind of support our creative endeavors. And then, of course, collaboration can certainly have challenges, but you talk in the book about creativity and community. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Creativity is social even when it does not seem to be. And you are mentioning a great example of that. You're mentioning example of writing. I wrote a book and I was the only author on the book.
Yeah.
So technically speaking, it's a solitary activity.
Right.
However, it is never truly solitary because ideas do not come out of a vacuum. They come from interaction with others. Now, some of those interactions are direct interactions. You are actually talking about the chapter to a person directly. Sometimes it is an interaction that is formal or semi-formal feedback. But sometimes it is less direct, like you are reading what other people have written. You are listening to podcasts. You are having experiences that may become part of what you are writing one way or another. And those are all social in nature. So when we think of the social side of creativity, we usually go immediately into collaboration and into teams, but that's not the only example that is relevant for it.
If there are people listening who are tending to do creative things in a more solitary way, do you have any tips or things you can recommend to them if they're kind of craving more community or collaboration or togetherness?
They are different kinds of relationship that help at a particular stage of the creative process. So early on in the creative process, when we are thinking of new ideas, we need new perspectives, we want to be broad, it helps to reach out to those people who we don't often talk with. And those can be people at the edges of our social networks, maybe people who we once a year meet with at a conference, or those who are part of our online communities where on LinkedIn, it's a professional community that you exchange ideas. So reaching out to people who are part of your community in that relatively remote way, what researchers call weak ties, it's really helpful in the early stages of the process. In the later stages, when you are committed to an idea, now you are developing and deepening it, those who know you well, who are going to start with yes, and are going to help you deepen it.
Yeah. I was just thinking about, as a therapist, as a psychologist, forever, I've had a consultation group. And when I first put my consultation group together, what I was thinking is, I want people who value evidence-based practice the way that I do, but who don't think exactly the same way I do, because I know what I would do. And I need people who are going to be fresh eyes, who have creative ideas for what to do when I'm stuck. And that has just been such an incredible gift as a therapist. And then I and many of my colleagues at different points too have created like mastermind groups, where you can meet and just kind of bounce ideas off of each other and brainstorm and at all sorts of different, whether it's like at the idea formation portion of a creative process or whether it's, say like getting a book out into the world or something like that, and just getting those fresh eyes and those other opinions, really, I think opens up just a lot of possibilities that you otherwise wouldn't think of on your own.
We can be purposeful, we can be intentional in building on the social nature of creativity so that we reach out to different people at different times. When you need those fresh perspectives, knowing purposefully to include people who don't think exactly like you is going to be beneficial. And at other times when you want to stay with something and developing and elaborate on it, very close colleagues who are thinking along the same lines are going to be more helpful.
Well, Zorana, this has been so great, so interesting. I love talking about creativity, and we're at the end of 2025, coming into 2026. Our last episode was a co-host episode all about creativity, and now we're sort of bookending it here with you, the expert, the researcher on creativity. So I hope that this will really encourage listeners to tap into their own creativity. If people want to learn more about you, where can they find you?
I have a free Substack newsletter that people can come and get small bite-sized pieces of science-based knowledge about creativity that is very actionable. And I would, for getting in-depth information, say, hope you're going to check out the Creativity Choice.
Absolutely. And we will link to all of those places in our show notes, including where people can get the book and your Substack. Thank you so much for joining us. This was such a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Jill.
Thank you for listening to my interview about creativity. I'm here with Debbie for our co-host post. Debbie, what were your thoughts on the episode today?
Well, creativity happens to be my current fixation lately. And so I loved listening to this. And to me, one of the most useful things about this conversation is that it will help people who want to be creative or would maybe enjoy being more creative, but who have some sort of block or challenge that gets in the way to doing it. Like if they have labeled themselves as not a creative person, or they have some sort of self-story around it that's keeping them stuck. Because there's so many opportunities for creativity in our lives. And I really liked that the two of you talked about creativity broadly applied, not just painting and drawing, but all these different ways it can show up in our lives. And I think that a lot of us compared ourselves to other people and felt uncreative. And so I really appreciated that you break through some of those myths and creativities for anyone who wants to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. That was my favorite thing about reading the book, because to be honest, like I assumed that the book was going to be more about painting and drawing and writing and that kind of thing. And I realized, oh, I'm guilty of thinking of creativity as only existing in the arts. So I really learned a lot from her, you know, that definition where really it's just about something novel that solves a problem. And, you know, I talked in the episode about when I asked my husband, do you consider yourself creative? And he clearly did not only think about creativity as pertaining to the arts. And so, yeah, I totally agree with you. I really liked the way that it was a more like outside the box kind of definition.
Yeah. When you talked about how we need to take action first, even if we're not so sure, we're not so confident, we need to have willingness. It really made me think about writing for myself. And I've talked a lot lately on the podcast about my writing class and the writing that I'm doing. And I was just thinking about how this shows up every single time I sit down to write. Either I think, I'm so boring, this is terrible, I have nothing to say. I go through this whole narrative about what a terrible writer I am and how nothing I have to say is interesting. Or I'm writing about something personal and a lot of emotion shows up. I was actually just writing this morning about something. I felt really sad. I kind of like started to cry a little bit because I was writing about something personal that had some poignancy. Yeah. And I actually love the gifts of being able to write. It's worth it to me. And I have to just allow all those inner demons, all those feelings to show up and just put the pen to the paper or get that keyboard clacking away because you just can't let that stop you.
Right. Like you have to be willing to do it in the presence of whatever discomfort shows up. I know for me with writing, you know, when I was writing my nonfiction books, I had a contract and I had a deadline and I had a paycheck, right? So like it wasn't hard to put time aside for that. But now I'm working on a novel and it's very rare that I actually sit down and do it because I have a hard time giving myself permission to do this thing that's just creative. I'm doing air quotes as if people can see me, and not for money and not part of my real job. And so that's, I think, similarly, like that's a place where I have to be able to sit with that discomfort of kind of like guilt, maybe is what it is. And if creativity matters, being willing to dive into those spaces, even when that discomfort is present.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out, because it almost feels like an indulgence or a getting away with something, like a waste of time, or it's not profitable or something. But I mean, we talked about this in our last episode when the co-host talked about creativity, about how you have to prioritize it anyway, because it's important for your humanity.
Yeah, it's funny because when I was in college, I took my first creative writing class, and I remember I got an A- in the class. I remember that I wrote a story called Chicken Again. I remember that the teacher gave me feedback. I capitalized my pronouns, she and her, to refer to my mom in this story. And she said, don't do that. It's too gimmicky. I do not remember one single other grade, assignment, comment from my entire academic career, but I remember that. And I think it's because I longed to write and be creative at that time. But I had these narratives and self-stories, similar to what I'm saying now about the guilt and the indulgence, like you said, that like I was raised by parents that the whole starving artist mentality, that like it's not worth spending time on that because it doesn't make any money. And there was no real, centering of creativity as a value. And it's something I didn't really start to come into until probably like in my 40s, I think.
Well, do you prioritize it more with your own kids as a parent?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So what pops in my head is when I read Julie Lythcott-Haim's book, I interviewed her on the podcast a couple years ago, and she wrote 2 books. One is How to Raise an Adult, and one is How to Be an Adult. And I specifically remember her talking about when you are a parent, that you should encourage whatever it is your kids want to do, to encourage them to do that. And the message should be, as long as you're able to support yourself, do whatever you want. And if you can support yourself in the arts, fabulous. And if not, then you figure out how to support yourself, but you still do the creative thing as, a side hustle. You make time for it. So it was like encouraging that you should still prioritize this, and you got to be able to pay your bills. And that like really stuck with me. I thought that was such a nice balance.
Oh, that's interesting.
Well, thanks everyone for listening. I really hope that this episode motivates you to look outside the box at the ways maybe you're creative, and I hope it stimulates you to go do some creative things. Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock. You can now listen to our podcast ad-free by becoming a supporter on Patreon. You can link to Patreon on our website or go to patreon.com/offtheclocksite.
If you enjoy our podcast, you can help us out by leaving a review and sharing this episode with a friend or an enemy who would enjoy it.
You can get more psychology tips by subscribing to our fabulous newsletter on Substack. Or if you're still addicted to social media, find us on Instagram and LinkedIn.
We'd like to thank our rockstar production manager, Jadine Stout-Williams.
Now for the boring part. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not meant to be a substitute for mental health treatment. If you're looking for mental health treatment, please visit the resources page of our website, offtheclockpsych.com.